Hypocrisy. The practice of claiming to have higher standards or more noble beliefs than is the case.
Tensions rising in Hong Kong. Hundreds arrested after those violent protests.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter.
They're protesting against a new government plan which would allow criminal suspects to be extradited to mainland China.
Students gathering on the streets, office workers also leaving their desks as they've started to do on a daily basis to demonstrate.
It was the end of an ugly day, with street battles that turned into brawls and seemed to go on forever.
We just want our freedom and democracy.
Fight for freedom. Stand with Hong Kong.
Daryl Morey, but I believe he wasn't educated on the situation at hand, and he spoke. And we all talk about this freedom of speech. Yes, we all do have freedom of speech, but at times there are ramifications for the negative that can happen when you're not thinking about others and you're only thinking about yourself.
Your Grace, I am yours to command.
Beats and Bros.
LeBron James is a basketball player, a pretty decent one for that matter. Hell, some even call him the greatest basketball player of all time. For myself personally, now that he's recently become a 4-time champion, I've got him at minimum number 2 all time. And considering that he's somehow still in his prime at the age of 35, he's in a very optimal position to continue building on that great legacy he already has, and potentially even finesse that number 1 spot from Jordan by the time he retires. Although some videos on my channel, such as my fake movie trailer for a LeBron James documentary, and not to mention the one you're currently watching right now, might all suggest otherwise, I promise you, I really am not just another irrational LeBron hater. 2018 was only the first year that I followed the NBA seriously, and watching LeBron's playoff run of complete and utter dominance throughout the Eastern Conference, up until the end of regulation in Game 1 of the Finals, was absolutely amazing, and left me in complete awe of the greatness I got to experience watching firsthand. I'd be lying if I didn't admit that during Game 1 of the Finals, in the moment, I honestly felt like I might be watching the greatest player of all time. I really am a fan of LeBron and his game on the court, and even own a couple of his jerseys. And unlike quite a few other NBA greats in history, I think that, for the most part, LeBron's a great role model for kids with how he handles himself on and off the court. He's a family man, he never gets involved in any fights or brawls during games, and rarely gets a tech for that matter. He's never been accused of any sort of sexual harassment allegations off the court, nor has he ever spat on an 8-year-old girl or thrown a man through a window. He's a good dude.
I think he's actually a very nice guy. In fact, I think he's too nice of a guy. Okay.
And all of the great things to come from his work and social initiatives in America is not lost on me. The LeBron James Family Foundation, the numerous charities that he's donated millions to, the I Promise School, his promotion of racial inequality and the injustices against blacks in America. All of that stuff is absolutely splendid. No criticisms here. This video is not, and I'll repeat that one, is not meant to take away anything from all the actual good work he's done and been responsible for. And with all those nice things having been said about LeBron, I think it's only fair that I proceed to shit on him for the remaining 36 minutes of this video. The source of my grievances with LeBron is, quite simply, that he is a blatant, unabashed hypocrite on social justice. To all the LeBron sexuals that I can already hear lurking in the comment section, look, I understand that in your cult it's considered sacrilege to speak ill of your master, King James, but if you would be so kind to refrain from smashing that dislike button for just a minute or 2, or 40, and actually hear me out, I'd greatly appreciate it. Now, when I say that LeBron James is a big fat hypocrite on social justice, which he is, LeBron stans might query how I could dare utter such ungodly words. Well, the answer is China.
Let's say China.
or to be a bit more specific, the comments LeBron made in response to the NBA China controversy following Daryl Morey's pro-Hong Kong protesters tweet in October of last year. The reason I'm only making a video on this subject now, as opposed to 12 months ago when it might have been a bit more topical and relevant to do so than it is now, is because, well, firstly, I was a bit too preoccupied with life to spend time making a 40-minute video, and secondly, it was as I watched the NBA players boycott unfold early in this year's playoffs and how that situation was ultimately resolved, that I noticed a similar theme on display which reminded me of LeBron's comments during the China controversy. This similarity, or parallel if you will, is how in both situations it appears that the underlying factor which LeBron and other NBA players apparently value above all else, including the social issue at hand, is money. In both the NBA players boycott and with LeBron's comments regarding Daryl Morey's tweet, it was money that ultimately triumphed as the players' primary concern and led to them backing off their commitment to supporting a human rights issue. When NBA players began their boycott of further playoff games in late August of this year, beginning with the Bucks' refusal to play Game 5 against the Magic in protest of the police shooting of Jacob Blake, there were calls from a number of players to just outright cancel the NBA season. There was a sentiment that with all the ongoing racial injustice and police brutality unfolding in America, that if the players stood together and refused to play any more games, leading to the season's cancellation, this would allow them to make a statement more effective and louder than any other way possible. The leading voice for this group of players was one Mr. LeBron James. Later that night, however, the Players Association Executive Director, Michelle Roberts, had a little meeting with the players who wanted the season to be cancelled, where she explained how all the players would lose a part of their salary in the following season if they went forward with their boycott of remaining playoff games. Then all of a sudden, by some unforeseen miracle, the players suddenly became a lot more amicable and open to the idea of returning to play, and the following day, they would reach an agreement with the owners that would result in an immediate return to the playoffs. I don't doubt for a second the legitimate sincerity and passion players felt when reacting to the unjust shooting of Jacob Blake and their calls to cancel the season as a result. I just find it quite telling how the second that they were told that their obscenely huge incomes would take a hit in the following season if they went through with the boycott, and they'd miss out on 25 to 30% of their salaries as a result, they backtracked, they folded, they whimpered out. All of that talk about ending the season in the name of making a statement against racism and social injustice went flying out the door, and proved to be nothing more than just that, all talk. And hey, I for one certainly didn't want to see the season cancelled, especially just after waiting nearly half a year for it to even return. And unless you're a Pandemic P fan, this year's playoffs did not disappoint. There were upsets left, right and centre. It was absolutely awesome to watch. I just think that the way the players who were calling for the season's cancellation, with the leading man being good old LeBron, and how they basically wimped out after being told they would lose money, really made all their previous talk look like meaningless posturing, without the will to back up their words with tangible action when it would mean a financial sacrifice on their part. It was this idea of money being the greatest motivator for NBA players above all else, standing by one's morals be damned, that reminded me a lot of that one time, 10 months earlier, when LeBron decided he'd rather take money from an oppressive authoritarian regime with a horrendous human rights record instead of supporting an oppressed people risking their safety and well-being to fight for their freedoms against said regime. But before I delve into the quagmire that is LeBron's response to Daryl Morey's tweet, just in case you're not fully informed about the historical and political context surrounding Hong Kong and China, and why Hong Kongers are actually even protesting to begin with, or maybe if you just need a simple refresher, I'm here to give you a quick rundown of the whole situation right now. Although if you really want to skip the history lesson because it's unbasketball related, you can go to the timestamp shown on the screen now.
我觉得过去20年在落实一国两制、港安治港、高度自治的方针，是成功的。
So first off, China.
China? China, China, China. I have to have my China. China, China because China.
China. You might have heard of them. They're a country that exists. And unfortunately for the 1.4 billion people living in this country, the political party which forms the government that they live under, the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP for short, don't exactly have what one might refer to as a great history with human rights. No, just like LeBron's free throw shooting in clutch situations, the CCP's human rights track record is absolutely abysmal. We don't even need to look back to the 1960s, when old mate Chairman Mao killed 45 million Chinese citizens from the enforcement of his ill-thought-out economic policies. Instead, all we need to do is simply look at what's happening in China right now, under the leadership of His Majesty Xi Jinping. In recent years, over 1 million, potentially as much as 3 million, of China's minority Muslim Uyghur population have been forcibly detained and imprisoned in, not concentration camps, because the CCP marketing department thought that name didn't have a nice ring to it, but re-education camps. Definitely a massive difference. Freedom of speech and freedom of expression is a big nah in China. All media within the country is heavily regulated and censored by the government. YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and many more websites are all blocked. You see, for the CCP, it's much easier to control your country's population when you get to dictate literally everything that they see and read, and thus heavily influence how that population thinks. China's justice system is the furthest thing from just. Law enforcement and the judicial system remain under the complete control of the CCP. Any Chinese citizen that's brave enough to publicly speak out against their government can rest assured that they will likely be disappeared by Chinese authorities as a result. The ongoing rollout of China's social credit system means that all Chinese individuals are now given a credit score that, if poor, will severely hamper that individual's day-to-day life and their ability to function in that society. The implications of a low credit score means things like being denied the ability to purchase plane tickets, being denied access to private schools and universities, and much more. Basically, this is Beijing's attempt at making a Black Mirror episode into the very real reality for its 1.4 billion citizens, and allows the government to conduct a level of mass surveillance and control on a scale that has quite literally never been seen in the history of humankind. Oh, also, the CCP like to dabble in the forced live organ harvesting of political prisoners, aka people who spoke out against their communist government. So that's pretty neat. And that's China. This is Hong Kong. Although Chinese, Hong Kong is not China. To be a bit more exact, their official status within China is Special Administrative Region, and this has only been the case since 1997. Before control of the city was ceded to China on July 1st of that year, Hong Kong lived under British rule for 156 years. Now, the Brits themselves don't necessarily have the most perfect track record on human rights from their time as colonial masters. I mean, you don't get to control a quarter of the entire world's landmass with only sunshine and flowers. But at least one positive from living under British rule is that they value important things like democracy, fish and chips, freedom of speech, a judicial system independent of political influence. Those are like the big four of necessities for an emancipated, free and liberated society. Due to the influence of Britain's rule over Hong Kong, by 1997, ideals of democracy and freedom, which at this point had been heavily suppressed for decades in mainland China, were entrenched in the city's psyche, and they weren't super keen to see their freedom suddenly disappear overnight after China took back control. Therefore, in order to allow for a smoother transition as Hong Kong's sovereignty was transferred from Britain to Beijing, the Chinese government agreed to uphold Hong Kong's pre-existing freedoms and ensure that the city gets to enjoy democracy and relative independence from the mainland government for a period of at least 50 years. This system of governance has been branded as one country, two systems. More fantastic work from the CCP's marketing department. Fast track to early 2019. With perhaps a little nudging from the mainland government, Hong Kong's government, headed by Miss Carrie Lam, introduced the Hong Kong Extradition Bill to their parliament. What this bill proposed, should it be made into law, was for the legal extradition of criminals from Hong Kong to Taiwan. It was drafted in response to a situation from the previous year when a 19-year-old piece of shit from Hong Kong murdered his pregnant girlfriend in Taiwan before jumping on a plane back to Hong Kong the next day. As he committed the crime in a different country, Hong Kong authorities were unable to charge the murderous little cunt as he hadn't actually broken any law whilst in Hong Kong. Thus, ostensibly, the extradition bill was introduced in order to allow for Hong Kong to extradite this guilty little fucker back to Taiwan, where he can face justice for his crime. However, skeptics weren't so sure that this was a true intention of the bill, as even though mainland China seemingly wouldn't be involved in this specific situation between Hong Kong and Taiwan, the extradition bill stipulated that criminals could be extradited to not only Taiwan, but much more significantly, mainland China. If this bill became law, what this meant for Hong Kong was that its citizens would effectively be beholden to mainland China's laws, and was therefore a massive erosion of the one country, two system doctrine China agreed to back in 1997. China has been chipping away at Hong Kong's autonomy for years, seemingly pushing harder and harder each year at what they can get away with, while exerting greater control over the city. Beijing clearly has every intention of eventually fully incorporating Hong Kong back under its complete control. And given the Chinese government's dismal human rights record, I think it's understandable that the people of Hong Kong hold a reservation or two towards towards their freedoms and cities' independence being encroached upon by China. The 2019 extradition bill was seen by Hong Kongers as trying to achieve exactly that, increase China's control over Hong Kong at the expense of the city's freedom, and Hong Kongers obviously did not want that to happen. Although it was made abundantly clear to Carrie Lam that the vast majority of Hong Kong's population absolutely did not want this bill to be made into law, she remained adamant that it would be passed anyway, and refused to even consider withdrawing it, basically telling the people who elected her to go eat a dick. And thus, this is when the protest started.
They have been corrupting our system for a very long time, and they taking back many of our rights.
We all are under 18.
You all are under 18?
Yeah, we are students. Secondary school.
Do your parents know that you're out here?
They don't know.
They don't know.
Donald Trump don't trust China. China is asshole.
With Lam's uncompromising refusal to withdraw the extradition bill, Hong Kong's participation in and support for the protests would only increase with each passing day, and by mid-June, there was an estimated near 2 million protesters demonstrating on Hong Kong streets in a single day, which is about a quarter of the city's entire population. Although the protests started off as, and mostly were and still are, peaceful, with Lam refusing to alter her government's stance on the bill, and with literally millions of protesters constantly demonstrating on the streets of Hong Kong for months on end, it was inevitable that things would get out of hand, and they did. Full-on fights between Hong Kong's police and protesters would break out. Hong Kong's parliament would be stormed by protesters. Police would shoot protesters at point-blank range with live ammunition. Bystanders were getting beaten up. People were dying. It was just complete chaos and anarchy. For many of the protesters, it probably felt like they were fighting a civil war, which in many respects is what it is. And it was about this point that the NBA enters the picture. In October 2019, the NBA had 2 preseason games scheduled for play in China, both of which were between the Lakers and the Nets. And it was on October 4, a few days before their first game in China was planned to take place, that Houston Rockets general manager, Daryl Morey, decided to tweet a certain picture. Although he would delete it not long after posting, it didn't matter. China had already seen it.
是。劳烦陛下，我想你要看看这个。给我看看。
The Chinese weren't very happy about Morey's tweet. Actually no, a more acute observation would be that they were fucking furious. As we all know, the CCP like having complete control over things, whether that be the media in their country or just the entire 1.4 billion Chinese population in general. This quest for complete control over everything also extends to their dealings with foreign businesses. China is well aware that being able to sell products to their population is a very lucrative, profitable, and desirable business opportunity for foreign businesses. Being able to successfully conduct business with China effectively means gaining access to a market worth nearly 20% of the entire world's population. Thus, when bargaining with foreign interests and organisations, the Chinese will use their optimal position as leverage for demanding that businesses abide by their strict rules if they want to have a successful deal. One such expectation from the Chinese is that the foreign businesses they're working with never engage in any sort of criticism of the Chinese government and all the horrible shit that they do, as God forbid they allow any semblance of free speech to sneak its way into their country. As the CCP likes to say, it's our way or the highway. Or, to be more accurate, 不听我的九分. So after Morey tweeted his support for the protesters in Hong Kong, people that are protesting against Chinese oppression, the Chinese weren't particularly happy about that and demanded that Morey be fired for his, I guess they would say, insubordination. How dare an NBA general manager use his freedom of speech to support a democratic movement fighting for their human rights? That is just ridiculous. And you know, for a short minute, it was up in the air how this situation was going to be resolved, and it was unknown if the NBA would actually bend all the way over to suck the CCP Chinese arsehole and actually fire Daryl Morey. Thank fuck for all things good and holy, Morey was not fired for expressing his opinion. Adam Silver actually showed a little something resembling a backbone and did not completely bend over to China in the name of money. Instead, Adam Silver took a neutral stance, reaffirming Daryl Morey's right to his freedom of expression, whilst not aligning the league with his opinion, although everyone knew this wouldn't be enough to appease almighty China, who proceeded to basically sever its entire relationship with the NBA. Do you want to know somebody who didn't take a neutral stance during this controversy, but took a rather apparent pro-Chinese government and anti-Hong Kong protesters stance? Take a wild guess, you might just get it right. The answer is LeBron James.
LeBron James.
LeBron James. LeBron James.
Go James.
I'm real.
Let's go.
Yep, now that we're 19 minutes into a video about the statements LeBron made during the NBA China controversy, I think it's about time we actually talk about the statements LeBron made during the NBA China controversy. Although Morey's tweet came out a few days before the scheduled preseason games in China kicked off, they would still go ahead as planned, albeit with very limited media coverage as they were unfolding in the middle of a fallout from Morey's tweet. As soon as the Lakers and Nets were done playing their second game on October 13th, all the players hopped on a plane and jetted back on over to the US. In this time, no player had made any comment about the ongoing situation with China to the media. This means that by October 14th, once everyone was safely back in America where they have freedom of speech, LeBron had a total of 10 days to contemplate his response and to formulate a well thought out and appropriate statement to make to the media. This is LeBron James we're talking about here. Every time he speaks on social issues, he always comes ready with an eloquent, well-articulated and profound statement to make, and I of course expected no less from him when talking about Hong Kong. LeBron is a man that prides himself on using his platform to raise awareness for injustices unfolding around the world, and to speak out on controversial social issues when others are afraid to do the same. He's a man well known as an unrelenting defender for human rights, who's willing to take slander from his critics if it means standing by his morals and doing what's right. His mantra is clearly on display in this tweet of his here, where he quoted Martin Luther King for how injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Powerful words indeed. No doubt, when he came to speak to the media on October 14th, LeBron was ready to stand by the people of Hong Kong, to stand up against the bully that is communist China, and to make clear to the world that he's ready to put his money where his mouth is, and fight injustice and oppression wherever it may be, even if that means he might sell a few less sneakers in China. This is what LeBron James had to say about the situation.
You know, when you're misinformed or you're not educated about something, and I'm just talking about, you know, the tweet itself, you know, you never know the ramifications that can happen. And sometimes you have to think through things that you say that may cause harm, not only for yourself, but for the majority of people. And I think that's just a prime example of that. I believe he was either misinformed or not really educated on the situation. And we all talk about this freedom of speech. Yes, we all do have freedom of speech, but at times there are ramifications for the negative that can happen when you're not thinking about others and you're only thinking about yourself. So, with Daryl Morey, but I believe he wasn't educated on the situation at hand, and he spoke, and so many people could have been harmed, not only financially but physically, emotionally, spiritually. Even though yes, we do have freedom of speech, but there can be a lot of negative that comes with that too.
And that's why I would not just shut up and dribble, because I mean too much to my two boys here, their best friend right here, and all these other kids that look up to me for inspiration. I get to sit up here and talk about social injustice, equality, and how I can help change kids, not only in America, but in Brazil and England and Mexico and all over. We have so many kids and so many people look up to us. To have that platform means everything to me.
LeBron James, the face of social justice, the man who proudly asserts himself as a defender of human rights, who says that he doesn't give a fuck how the backlash of his support for social issues might affect him personally, says to the guy who is risking his reputation and career to support a democratic movement fighting oppression, "You're not educated and only thinking of yourself." This is easily the most pathetic thing I've ever seen from a sports superstar, and I've seen Kevin Durant join the Warriors. The level of ignorance, arrogance, and most damning of all, hypocrisy that was displayed in these comments by LeBron is just baffling. He's literally mad at Daryl Morey for using his platform to speak out on a human rights issue and to show his support for those protesting against injustice and oppression. And of course, everyone knows that the reason LeBron is so mad at Daryl Morey for speaking his mind, and the reason he's taking such a fierce anti-Hong Kong protester stance, is because of money. If the relationship between the NBA and China sours, then LeBron stands to lose all that sweet renminbi he would have otherwise received from future sneaker sales to the Chinese. He's also probably worried that Space Jam 2 won't be able to open in China anymore, so there's lost money from that too. Obviously that was a tough pill for LeBron to swallow, given how he's such a poor, poverty-stricken man and can't possibly spare any cash. To summarise LeBron's grievances with Morey's tweet, basically he's mad that he's going to lose money from Morey's support for Hong Kongers' human rights, and as a result, we can now officially conclude that from LeBron's perspective, human rights only matter when there's no risk of losing money. So if supporting a human rights issue means lost money, well, then bad luck. Those victims of human rights abuse can go fuck themselves. This just shows that when LeBron talks about social justice in America, such as on police brutality and racial inequality, he's only willing to do so because he knows there's no financial consequences for himself personally, and thus has nothing to lose. When LeBron voices his support for Black Lives Matter and says racism is bad, the vast majority of NBA fans aren't going to disagree with him. This is the exact rhetoric and sentiment that most NBA fans already wholeheartedly agree with, and if anything, will only serve to gain LeBron even more devout and loyal fans who support his pro-Black Lives Matter stance. Sure, he might lose a few right-leaning Republican fans when he publicly calls Donald Trump a bum.
It's not a name call. It's you bum. Me and my friends call each other that all the time. I'm not his friend though. I don't want to see that on the note. He's not my friend.
But the small amount of fans he loses in that instance will just as quickly be replaced by new fans from the other side of the political aisle, who support his anti-Trump comments. And you know, if a Chinese individual tried pulling the same shit in their country and called their president a bum, they may as well say their final farewell to their families, as they'll probably be disappeared by Chinese police not long after. But sure thing, LeBron, please continue to take your freedom of speech for granted, and tell others not to use their freedom of speech when it might negatively impact your bank account. I'd actually love if a LeBron sexual could explain to me how LeBron's comments, which basically told Morey that he's an uneducated pleb and should just shut the hell up, can someone please explain to me how that is any different to the shut up and dribble comments Laura Ingraham made to LeBron in early 2018. The way I see it, LeBron may as well have told Daryl Morey to shut up and general manage. It's just unbelievably hypocritical. I don't know if LeBron's comments were more moronic or ironic. There's certainly an irony to LeBron James, someone whose formal education ended with his senior year of high school, calling Daryl Morey, a university graduate with his master's in business administration, not educated. But the greater irony is that Morey, someone who has worked closely with China for years, is obviously much more educated and informed on the situation between China and Hong Kong than LeBron is, and is hence why he felt motivated enough to voice his support for the Hong Kong protesters on social media, as he felt morally obligated to do so. Yet LeBron has the arrogance to just flat out call him not educated on the topic, when he himself is clearly the one lacking education on this certain issue. The only thing Daryl obviously wasn't educated on was the exact amount of money that LeBron's bank account was going to lose from this tweet. Gee, what an idiot. True social activism, that thing LeBron claims to be all about, involves being willing to actually sacrifice something if need be in pursuit of achieving greater social or political change. The Martin Luther Kings of the world, the Nelson Mandelas, the Gandhis, these individuals all had to sacrifice something, be that their career, money, reputation, or even ultimately life. It's no secret that LeBron wants to be the greatest basketball player of all time, or at least viewed as such, and even thinks that's a feat he's already achieved.
And then after I stopped, I was like, that one right there made you the greatest player of all time.
One of the few things held against Michael Jordan's legacy, and there's not many because he is absolutely the greatest basketball player of all time, is how he avoided any sort of political or social activism throughout his career. This was something we actually saw covered in episode 5 of The Last Dance. It is my sincere opinion that LeBron sees MJ's lack of social activism as an opportunity for himself to elevate his own legacy and get a leg up over Jordan when it comes to the GOAT debate. If LeBron can continue to be one of the best basketball players in NBA history, whilst also being a universal image for social justice and human rights off the court, that's a very impressive legacy to leave behind. Although you might think LeBron's work off the court wouldn't be relevant to his all-time ranking as a basketball player, most fans tend to bring up how Jordan was such a great global ambassador and icon for basketball off the court when discussing his case of being the greatest of all time. And thus, LeBron's activism for social justice issues will likely be factored into his all-time ranking by fans in the future, whether you agree with that or not. Here's the thing, there's a reason Jordan never involved himself in politics. The predicament LeBron found himself in after exposing himself as a hypocrite during the NBA China controversy is a perfect example of the exact thing MJ wanted to avoid. Jordan simply wanted to be the best basketball player he possibly could be, and to make as much money as possible doing so. Two endeavours he was quite successful at. Jordan was, and is, a man whose primary motivation is money, and he's never claimed otherwise. LeBron James is also a man whose primary motivation is money, except he has and does claim otherwise, and ends up as a hypocrite as a result. LeBron willingly and purposefully involved himself in politics, positioning himself as an advocate for social justice, and therefore can be fairly critiqued for the comments he makes on social and political issues. One famous sporting figure who successfully left behind a legacy intertwined with his social activism, and someone that LeBron is likely trying to emulate his success with in regards to being known as a social activist, is the great Muhammad Ali. Unfortunately for LeBron, there's a reason that Ali is the greatest.
I'm still the greatest of all time.
And he is not. When Ali partook in social activism, he didn't just say he was all about doing the right thing. When push came to shove, he actually stood by his morals and did what he deems to be the right thing. Despite the legal repercussions of avoiding the draft, Ali refused to join the army and fight in the Vietnam War. The Viet Cong had never done any harm to him, and thus he didn't feel right to go over to their country and start shooting at them.
And shoot them for what? They never called me nigger. They never lynched me. They never put no dogs on me. They never robbed me of my nationality, raped and killed my mother and father. Well, just take me to jail.
As a result of his defiance, Ali's boxing titles were stripped, he was imprisoned in jail, his boxing license and means of making money was revoked and taken from him, and yet he remained true to his morals. Standing up for one's beliefs like this, when it really counts, is something that takes great courage and character. Two things that Muhammad Ali had more than enough of. But it was a different world in the 1960s, so here's a more recent example of what real activism at work looks like, and is one more connected to basketball. This example is of Maya Moore. If you follow the WNBA, something I honestly could just never fathom doing myself, you'll likely already have an idea about the great work she's done. Moore is one of the greatest WNBA players in history, sitting somewhere in the top 5 all-time mark, depending on who you ask. In the WNBA, Maya has been a scoring champion, an MVP, a finals MVP, a 4-time champion, basically every accolade you can think of. She's someone that Sports Illustrated has called the greatest winner in women's basketball history. And similar to LeBron, she's still in her basketball prime, and thus in a position to continue adding to her legacy. And guess what? She hasn't played a professional basketball game in over 2 years. The reason? Because she has chosen to abstain from playing basketball to instead focus her efforts on prison reform and attaining the release of a wrongfully convicted black man. That's right, at age 29, just as she was entering the prime of her playing career, at the peak of her success, Maya decided to walk away from the game she loves to instead dedicate herself to social activism off the court. Don't forget, WNBA players' salaries are nowhere close to the type of contracts being dished out in the NBA. So for Moore to just walk away from her source of income, despite not having the financial security net that NBA players get to enjoy, and especially in comparison to LeBron, whose net worth is 1,600 times larger than Maya's, I just think that makes her action so much more commendable, as she's willing to sacrifice her income for the greater good, despite not being particularly rich to begin with. Fortunately, just like she is in the basketball court, Moore has been very successful in her off-court endeavours. Jonathan Irons, the wrongfully imprisoned black man who Moore had been fighting for the release of for years, actually had his conviction overturned in July of this year and was released from prison. And not long after, in a bit of a twist, Moore and Irons got married not long after his release. It's a good thing to see his story get a happy ending. The reason I brought up the examples of Muhammad Ali and Maya Moore isn't to suggest that LeBron needs to drop his basketball career and focus all of his efforts on social activism if he doesn't want to be a hypocrite. I'm not advocating for anything of the sort. I don't want LeBron to just suddenly stop playing. I'm lucky enough to watch one of the greatest basketball players in history in their prime play the game that I love, and I wouldn't miss it for the world. What I was trying to illustrate, however, is that real social activism and fighting for social justice is something that requires full dedication and commitment, and the willingness to potentially sacrifice something in the name of the greater good. You either go all the way or not at all. If you stand for human rights, then you stand for human rights everywhere, not just in your own nation when it's convenient. And LeBron, I understand that we all got to chase that bag. I mean, who doesn't want to make money? But bro, come on. You're the 5th highest paid athlete in the world. You're pulling in nearly $100 million US a year. You don't think you could have scraped by if you were willing to lose some of the profits from your sneaker sales in China? If it meant standing up for Hong Kong's human rights and supporting a pro-democracy movement trying to fight oppression? And hey, I get that the prospect of completely sabotaging your relationship with China by showing your full support for the Hong Kong protesters likely isn't too exciting for you. I mean, it would be an exceptional display of character on your part, but whatever. The least you could have done was to just stay neutral. It would still be a cop-out, and your silence would still be very damning and hypocritical, considering your previous remarks on social justice. But sweet Mary, Mother of Jesus, staying neutral would have been immensely better than what you actually ended up doing, which was clearly siding in favour of the bad guys and against the people in Hong Kong fighting for their future. LeBron, was it really too difficult for you, instead of coming out and attacking Daryl Morey for using his freedom of speech, to have easily said something along the lines of, "I don't feel well versed enough on this situation to make a comment at this point in time. Moving forward, I'll be sure to read up on the history of China and Hong Kong and the context of what's going on right now to better educate myself on what's happening," and leave it at that. Some sort of response like that would have easily sufficed. Yet, over the course of 10 days, in which time you and your PR team should have been determining the best, most articulate response possible, you come out and basically say, Daryl Morey is an idiot and I don't support human rights if my money is involved. Not that I have any sort of inside information, but I absolutely believe Nike was on the phone to LeBron during that 10-day period, telling him to suck China's balls in his statements to the media, or else they'll both risk losing money. And that is subsequently what LeBron did. You know LeBron has really messed up when even Shannon Sharpe of all people is calling him out on Undisputed. Shannon is probably the most notorious LeBron sexual in the NBA media, even beating out stiff competition from cancers like Nick Wright and Ryan Hollins. Although unlike those guys, Uncle Shay Shay is actually quite funny and enjoyable to watch. Shannon is someone that his senile gremlin co-host tends to call
less Shannon Sharpe
due to his unrelenting love of LeBron. This is what Shannon had to say in regards to LeBron's comments.
So LeBron James had 10 days to think about, contextualize, and come to how he want to verbalize his response, knowing, excuse me, that he was going to get asked this question. Okay, he says he's not going to speak on this topic because he hadn't followed it that closely, so he's not informed, he's not educated. So if you're not informed and you're not educated, how do you get to call someone else uninformed, uneducated? Because for you to call someone that, you need to be educated on said topic. The thing that separated LeBron James from Michael Jordan is that LeBron James would take a stance.
I agree.
And did not care about the financial impact. And then in this situation, he said it could impact financially, emotionally, physically.
Even which is spiritually.
This situation seemed to have bothered him for some reason.
Yep.
We know the reason, Skip. We know that the financial, China spends a lot of money with the NBA. But I'm gonna disagree with LeBron and Skip. I don't disagree with LeBron very often.
You don't.
But in this situation, I'm gonna have to disagree, and I don't like what he said. I don't like the way he verbalized it.
A couple other NBA players who actually have some balls and aren't afraid of the great King James were calling LeBron out on social media, such as from the Aussie great Andrew Bogut.
Everyone is for the cause until the cause costs them money.
And also from defensive stud Enes Kanter, somebody who knows all too well what it's like to have an authoritarian government abuse its citizens' human rights.
Freedom is not free.
South Park creators, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, weren't too impressed by LeBron's cowardice either, something they illustrated in the South Park episode which came out 2 days after LeBron's comments.
Yes, we do all have freedom of speech, but at times there are ramifications for the negative that can happen when you're not thinking about others and you're only thinking about yourself.
Whoa, what's going on, kids?
The protesters are trying to kill Eric again, Mr. Mackey.
Okay, kids, we don't want another incident here, okay?
They're trying to take people's lunch. They don't realize it harms people financially, physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
Eric, it's okay. We aren't gonna change the school menu, okay? Everything's fine.
That's not fair. Doesn't it matter we're being silenced? My lunch.
And then, after the absolute shitstorm LeBron created for himself on social media after his initial comments, he decided to make himself look even worse by putting out the following two supposed clarification tweets a few hours later.
Let me clear up the confusion. I do not believe there was any consideration for the consequences and ramifications of the tweet. I'm not discussing the substance. Others can talk about that. My team and this league just went through a difficult week. I think people need to understand what a tweet or statement can do to others, and I believe nobody stopped and considered what would happen. Could have waited a week to send it.
These tweets were meant to be damage control for LeBron, but all they achieved for him was to make the damage uncontrollable. You thought his initial comments were bad? The level of ignorance shown in these tweets is equally absurd. Hey guys, me and my team just had a difficult week, so back off alright. Oh, poor LeBron, you had a really difficult, tough week in China. China, did you? Boo-hoo. I'm sure it must have been so difficult for you to spend that week hanging out in a 5-star hotel before flying back to America. It's a damn crime you had to endure such hardship and adversity. Honestly sounds more devastating than a Greek tragedy. How on earth will you ever recover? I'm sure your week was so much more difficult than for the protesters in Hong Kong who are risking their lives to fight for their freedom and democracy. I bet your week was way worse than the 1 million Muslim Uyghurs who have been forced into Chinese concentration camps. To summarise your tweets, you're grumpy that Morey supported human rights in Hong Kong, and you're now probably going to lose money. And of course, money is the only thing that should be considered when making a decision on human rights. The actual substance of Morey's tweet is for losers.
The finals MVP is LeBron James.
When we leave here, we got to continue to push that. Continue to push social injustice, continue to push for voter suppression, continue to push for police brutality, continue to push for everything that's the opposite of love.
This whole situation with LeBron just lost so much of my respect for him. From his original comments to the media to his follow-up tweets, he just displayed such an unfathomable amount of ignorance, arrogance, hypocrisy, disrespect, and selfishness. Daryl Morey was literally trying to give a voice to an oppressed people who are standing up to an authoritarian regime and are fighting for their civil liberties. And the only thing you could care less about is how that tweet was going to have a relatively insignificant impact on your bank balance. Morey considered the millions upon millions of people suffering from an oppressive, undemocratic regime. The only millions LeBron considered were the millions upon millions of renminbi he makes from doing business with the CCP. This world we live in, with how extremely fast the news cycle has become, it can be easy to quickly forget something that happened just a month earlier, let alone a year, as there's always something new that's capturing everyone's attention for the day. I feel like this has happened with LeBron, and especially now that he's just won his 4th championship, the last thing anybody is talking about is how he has no credibility when speaking on social justice. The protesters in Hong Kong certainly haven't forgotten what he said, nor is their ordeal with China even close to being over. The Hong Kong protests continue to this very day, albeit on a much smaller scale at the moment, as the world deals with that pesky little thing that of course came from China. Although the 2019 extradition bill, the original cause of the protests, has since been rescinded and killed, Hong Kong's fight for freedom, justice and democracy is far from being finished. There have been no official investigations into the obscene police brutality inflicted upon protesters over the past year and a half, nor is Hong Kong's democracy particularly secure from China, something extremely evident with the Hong Kong national security law that was implemented earlier this year. This new law, which came into effect on July 1st and was created by the mainland Chinese government, not Hong Kong's, makes it illegal for everyone in or from Hong Kong, so foreigners living in Hong Kong included, to, among other things, advocate for Hong Kong's independence and obstruct the movements of police. As it is Beijing, not Hong Kong, who get to choose how this law is interpreted, it basically allows the CCP the power to surveil and control the Hong Kong population in a way they've never been able to do before. China's grip on Hong Kong's future continues to close tighter, and Hong Kong's fight against oppression and for a better, brighter and freer future will continue on. And LeBron, evidently, could give less of a shit. It's an inevitability for this video to receive hate from LeBron fans, and I'm very aware of that. How dare I suggest that LeBron James, the face of social justice, the man who's been leading the fight against social justice issues for years, is nothing more than a hypocrite? Well, I say that because he simply is one. That doesn't mean I want him to stop all the great work he's done in America in supporting black communities and speaking out on the injustices that take place in that country. I just wish he wasn't a hypocrite about it. The definition of hypocrisy is claiming to have more noble beliefs than is the case. LeBron claims to be fighting injustice anywhere in the name of justice everywhere. LeBron also criticizes his colleagues when they voice support for a pro-democracy movement against a communist regime that runs modern-day concentration camps. LeBron claims one thing and does another. That is the literal definition of hypocrisy. LeBron, you don't get to say you're using your platform to be all woke and progressive on social issues, but then turn a blind eye the second it starts costing you a bag. You can't have it both ways, man. Right is right.
All right, well, you know what they say. You gotta lower your ideals of freedom if you want to suck on the warm teat of China.
Unless you live in China, you're of course free to form your own opinions, but the main takeaway I personally got from this situation is that from now on, you can simply never take LeBron seriously when he talks on social justice and human rights issues. He has demonstrated that he's only willing to take a stand on a social issue when it means he won't lose any money, and therefore lacks both credibility and integrity. His shoes might have the word equality printed on them, but what they don't say is equality only matters when it doesn't impact LeBron's bank account. In conclusion, LeBron James is a hypocritical bitch, Kevin Durant is still a snake, Lou Dort is the future MVP, and this video is now over. Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong. Thanks for watching. The end.
Don't trust China, China is SO. Don't trust China, China is SO. Don't trust China, SO. Trust China, China is SO. Don't trust China, China is SO. Don't trust China, SO. Don't trust China, China is SO.